One of the most fascinating aspects of your book was identifying different moral values that transcend nationality or society, that there are things that just human beings are wired for. And you mentioned one of them, which is reciprocity, which is if someone does something nice for you, then we're wired to be nice to them. And you can see that, you and I are parents. You can see that with infants, where if like you smile, they're likely to smile back. That's kind of like most of the interaction you have. And so you're identifying these six universal moral values I thought was so important. And those moral values you identified were caring, fairness, sanctity, loyalty, authority, and then you also identified liberty. And if you look at these values, liberals and progressives tend to operate more on the caring and fairness dimensions, and conservatives tend to operate more along the lines of sanctity, loyalty, and authority.
Right.
With
Social
liberty being
conservatives now. Yeah,
social conservatives.
that's right. Yeah.
With liberty being interpreted and valued slightly differently by each side.
That's right. So, I love metaphors, and the human mind is a pattern matcher. We think in metaphors. So, if you have a good metaphor, it makes it easy to understand something. So, the metaphor that I think is best here is, we all have the same tongues, more or less, and our tongue, if you're a human being, your tongue has five taste receptors for sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and umami, which is kind of a meat flavor. Because we evolved, our ancestors ate meat and fruit, and so those guide us to the right things. So we all have the same taste receptors, but depending on what culture you grow up in, you have a different cuisine, and maybe I thought America had a lot of a lot of sweetness, but then I went to Chile. In Chile, they consume more sugar than anyone on earth, and like everything is so sickly sweet in Chile, but that's what they're used to. And other cuisines are spicier and have so anyway, the point is we have an evolved nature that guides us to things that were good for our ancestors, and we have cultural nature that grew up historically based on local circumstances. And it's the same thing with morality. So care is the easiest one to understand because we're mammals. And what it means to be a mammal is that you nurture your young for a long time. You have huge parental investment. And for most mammals, it's only the female that makes the investment. But in humans and a few other species, males fall in love with their kids and make the investment too. So we all have tremendous sensitivity to suffering, and we see, like that famous photo of a 2-year-old washed up on the beach in southern Europe, that was so powerful for during the immigration issue in Europe. Um, we all are wired to respond. Now, conservatives love their children and and have sympathy for suffering, but conservative morality is not based primarily on that. Whereas left-wing moralities, especially modern Western left-wing, is based much more on compassion, care. The, how you think society should be ordered is based on that foundation. Conservatives have that foundation, but their morality is not heavily based on it. Fairness. Second one, as you said, reciprocity. Our ancestors are evolved to trade. We trade not just things, we trade insults, we trade favors. So reciprocity is very deep in us. And if you do something for someone and they don't reciprocate, we hold on to that. We resent that. We have a strong sense of people who take more than they give. But in some cultures, you have such attention to direct fairness that if somebody insults somebody in your family, you now have to insult someone in theirs, or it quickly escalates to a feud and violence. And in other subcultures, it's turn the other cheek or just brush it off. So we all have the same moral foundations, but different cultures construct them differently. And as you said, the social conservatives in the United States, they rely on care to some extent. Fairness for them is proportionality. If you do the crime, you do the time. Whereas fairness on the left is more about equality, and nowadays especially equality of outcome. And if you have disparities, if you have one group is doing better than another, that looks on the surface to be unfair because it's unequal. So we all talk about fairness, but we mean something different. And then liberty is kind of similar on the left and the right, except that on the left, people see corporations and rich people as the oppressors, as the ones that need to be overthrown, historically going all the way back to Marx. Whereas on the right, the American right, it's government. There's a real suspicion. Government is the bully, and we have to arm ourselves, and Second Amendment and all that. So those three foundations are used by both sides, but they mean something different. And then loyalty, authority, and sanctity, those three are heavily used by social conservatives, and they are largely rejected by the modern left, because those are the psychological foundations of tribalism, of group loyalty. If fascist morality is very heavily based on group loyalty, authority to the strong man, and a sense of sanctity or purity about the motherland, things like that. So any culture war in America, like the American flag, it's if you're on the left, well, burning the American flag is a kind of free speech. But if you're on the right, the flag is sacred. It's not just a piece of cloth. So, so what I found from reading ethnographies and looking at evolution was morality varies, but the sort of the deep psychological structures of it are universal. And once you understand that, now the way is open. If you're a Democrat and you want to appeal to moderates and conservatives, don't frame it in terms of oppression or suffering. Frame it in terms of the great American promise, or what's great about America, or American traditions, or something like that. You can couch almost any appeal you can ground it in foundations that your listener responds to.
I had this experience countless times on the trail. I thought of you sometimes, John, you should know. So I'll give you one example. I am for universal health care. I think it makes perfect sense. It makes no sense not to have universal health care, particularly in this context. It makes zero sense to tie it to jobs, given that the majority of jobs now are temporary gig or contract jobs, and you don't get benefits a lot of the time. But when people asked me about universal health care, the way a lot of folks frame it is it's a human right, and there's this caring argument, which I agree with 100%. I mean, it's inhumane and savage and barbaric that we have people that don't have health care. But the way I would frame it often, and I totally believe this too, so it wasn't a stretch for me, was look, imagine all of the Americans who never started a small business, never changed jobs, never made some kind of independent venture happen because they were stuck in a job that had healthcare and they knew that they would lose their healthcare if they lost it. That if you're pro entrepreneurship, pro business creation, pro risk taking, you should be for universal healthcare too, because this is just awful for any form of economic dynamism. And I completely believe that. I mean, it's true. I've run a business, and this healthcare system does keep people fixed in place in ways that's not very positive. But that's an argument that would work on a different set of Americans
Exactly.
than
That's right.
the caring and fairness argument.
That's right, because the right. So Ronald Reagan gave us Ronald Reagan created the coalition of social conservatives and business conservatives, or laissez-faire capitalists who are not conservative in any way. They're pro business, but they're not social. They're very different from social conservatives. And the third group is authoritarians, people who are prone to racism when triggered by the sense that our moral order is coming apart. So psychologically, there's three very different groups: social conservatives, libertarians or laissez-faire conservatives or capitalists, and authoritarians. So he united those three into a very powerful coalition. And the authoritarians were never in the driver's seat. They're less educated. They're more racist. They were never in the driver's seat. And that's what's unique about our era, is that the true social conservatives, who I have a lot of respect for, a lot of them are anti-Trump. A lot of them were sort of kicked out of the club. So the never-Trumpers, a lot of those are Burkean conservatives. And the authoritarians, for the first time, have at least the president's ear. They are much more influential in the modern right coalition. So it's kind of a mess now. And I have in the book you can tell, I think, that I have a lot of respect for conservatives and libertarians, but as well as the left. But in the last 4 years, the Republican Party, I think, has kind of lost its mind because that Reagan coalition is really changing, and it's not conservative in any way that I can recognize.
Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.